I had this grind porn mentality of my value is less if I'm not working really, really hard and struggling. So the idea that you can get really good work done and that you can bring value and have a balanced and life where you are in a good place physically and mentally was like, I mean, it sounds really obvious to say out loud, but just like Heather is a really big role model and mentor for me in that way.
Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
Welcome, everybody. I am so excited today. I have the founder of Closet Core Patterns and co-founders of Core Fabrics with me today, Montreal-based companies. They are disruptors in the fast fashion industry. They are leaders in body positivity, and they are deeply committed to sustainable living. I'm so happy to have Heather Luenza and Tereska Gethsing with me on Venture for Canada's A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. So huge welcome to you both. Thanks for being here with me.
I am impressed with myself based on that introduction.
Thanks for having us.
That's right.
What a kind intro. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, I am honored to be chatting with you two superpower people. Heather, so you launched the first company, Closet Core Patterns, 13 years ago, I think, right?
Well, no, it was in 2013. So that's when I launched the business, but it started from a blog that started in 2011.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Got it. So that was the 2011. Okay. Well, thinking back to when you first started that blog and then turned it into a business, can you tell me why you started it? What gap were you trying to fill? What need were you seeing out there that wasn't being met?
Well, it started very organically. I like I said, in 2011, I started the sewing blog, and I was in a lot of consumer debt. I was a shopaholic, and I had kind of set myself a challenge that I wasn't going to buy anything new. I was only going to sew my own clothes and thrift, and I was going to finally teach myself how to sew. And when I taught myself how to sew, it kind of took over my life in a very meaningful and amazing way. And it happened right at the time that blogs were kind of blowing up and everybody had a blog. And I ended up meeting this amazing community of women that were kind of on the same journey. And like to this day, I'm very close friends with a lot of those people that we were meeting on Blogspot and commenting on each other's blogs. And I was working as a commercial interior designer at the time, working at this firm that we did primarily shopping centers. So I kind of started to become aware of this dissonance between my personal journey to try to kind of like reduce consumption and weed myself off fast fashion. And then at the same time, I was literally designing shopping malls where all the fast fashion stores were located. And so that started kind of weighing on me. And I think I've always been quite entrepreneurial. And I kind of realized at the firm that I was at that there was a very limited amount of growth that I was going to be able to do within the company. There wasn't really, my boss wasn't interested in taking on a partner. And, it was just, I was kind of growing very slowly. And I was just, I was an ambitious person. I was kind of ready to maybe take control of my own destiny. But I think that was kind of subconscious because I released a PDF pattern in 2013 just as an experiment. And initially I was also just planning on it being free. It was this kind of vintage inspired swimsuit that was very on trend at the time. And because I have all this drafting experience and architectural experience, it was quite easy for me to kind of transfer a lot of those skills into this drafting of the pattern. And it took off. And I think I made $10,000 in my first year off this one pattern. And I kind of thought, okay, well, maybe there's something here. And I initially wanted to quit my job and start doing it full time. And I remember my dad saying, okay, like, you can't do that. Like, you've only released one, like you have to like do a second one and see if you're going to have the same kind of response before you blow up your entire life. And so I did a second one and it also did similarly well. And I realized, okay, there's legs here. And at that point I did quit my job. So that would have been 2013. And then out of my apartment in Montreal, I started Closet Core, which at the time it was called Closet Case Files. And we've over the years have evolved. And the business really steadily and slowly grew over the last 10 years. And yeah, at this point now we have like 3 pattern lines. We've got a team of 8 people. We work out of this beautiful shared space with Core Fabrics. And yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine that when I was stealing time at my old job, or staying late at work to design this pattern and use their printer to print the pattern pieces, that I was going to kind of be here 10 years later. But that's kind of where we're at.
Fantastic. Congratulations. The other part of it that I remember you talking to me a little bit about is this body positivity. And I think you said um, that the goal is to make the clothes fit the body instead of make the body fit the clothes. Can you talk to me a little bit about your experience with that and why that matters so much to you?
Well, I think I kind of skipped over in that thing that I just said, which was why sewing was so meaningful to me and why I kind of connected with it so closely. And I think a big part of it was realizing that when you sew your own clothes, the only thing that you're really limited by is your imagination. So
Mhm.
you can make anything fit your body. And for somebody like me who loved vintage clothes and could never find anything that fit, or it was in polyester, it was like all of a sudden it was like, oh, I could make a beautiful Dior New Look inspired dress that fits me perfectly. I don't need to go spend a ton of money at a vintage store, and it's going to fit my body perfectly. And I think over the course of sewing, the first few years, just realizing like, oh, I'm not subject to the tyranny of the dressing room, right? Where I don't need to go into this dressing room and put on jeans and feel terrible about my body because they don't fit. I can make the jeans fit me. And that was like a huge, probably like one of the biggest epiphanies I've ever had in my life. And I think most people who sew their own clothes realize that, where they're like, oh, like, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just, I just need to learn how to make this fit my body. And I think that is a really key component of the sewing experience, and it's a really key component of our business model and how we think about our patterns. Is just realizing that there's no one size fits all. That um, again, like people are collaborating with us. Like they use the pattern. Like I almost think of what we produce as a tool,
Mhm.
and it's up to you to decide how you use the tool.
Mhm.
But it's a tool. It's not. It's not it's not a fixed thing that can't change,
Right.
right?
It's
It's a
not a
thing that
product.
you can adapt. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of like addressing my niche or kind of how looking at the market and seeing um, where there was space for me, I don't know if I ever took a really business like approach of like, well, here's what these companies are doing and this is what I could offer. I just have always been a very confident person and knew I had a really strong point of view and always just kind of felt like if people were into what I wanted and what I liked, that was it, right? Like that was the niche that was being met. And thankfully, over the years, and especially with the growth of the team and the addition to two new team members, it's not just my vision anymore. It's a collective vision that we're all building together. And I'm really grateful and happy that people are on board with the vision, right? Which is kind of constant and ever evolving.
Mm. I think that's such a relatable moment, being in the changing room and just being going from being happy Gina walking along, having a great day, to being plunged into the depths of despair, just looking at myself in that mirror, and just all of the confidence just being like completely pulled out from under you. And it's even sadder sometimes for me when I feel it. I just feel kind of depressed and like I look like terrible. But when I watch a friend do it, so a friend was texting me from a changing room, she was trying to shop and she was telling me how terrible she was feeling. And it was just so sad. I was like, what the, like, why does this happen? Why do we, what is the alternative? And before I kind of talked to you guys, I hadn't really thought of this. I have a wonderful colleague, Kathleen at Venture for Canada, and she sews her own clothes. And I now have a completely different understanding of kind of what she does, which is really cool. Okay. Thank you so much, Heather. And so then, in the middle of kind of the pandemic, or yeah, in the middle of the pandemic, you decided to launch Core Fabrics, which feels to me like a natural extension of Closet Core Patterns. Um, and you decided to bring in Tereska. Tell me a little bit about why did you decide to go with a co-founder for this?
I was spending a lot of time alone in the woods and I was going for long walks with my dog and just kind of, I think like a lot of us were reflecting on my life and, what did I want my life to look like? What did I want the next 10 years to look like? And I just the idea for the fabric store kind of came to me really quickly and kind of all at once. And I had this very clear vision. Obviously, like from a business, people would describe it as like, oh, it's a smart vertical integration. You're going to move from one thing to the other. But on a really practical level, we have to produce so many samples. And it's like the biggest pain point for us at the time was just finding the fabrics that we like that we're going to like I have this vision for or me and my designer are working together. We have a vision for what this pattern looks like. And just like you're going into a clothing store and you're trying to find clothes that fit your body or whatever. We're trying to find fabrics that meet our vision of what this pattern's supposed to look like. And it was really difficult. And we spent a lot of time trying to find sample fabric. And so again, like as a designer, who's somebody who thinks about every part of the process, from how my website looks like to what my office feels like to work in, to how our clothes are designed, every part of that is really important to me. As Tereska knows, I drive her absolutely crazy with how much I care about how everything looks. I think it was really exciting to me to have that kind of control, let's just be honest, because that's what it is, over the fabrics that we were using, and coming at it from a very sustainable place. I'm somebody who has a lot of apocalypse and climate change anxiety. And so thinking about how to take this kind of need that we had, this need that I thought we could fulfill for our customers, who are also like always looking for fabrics and always asking us, what fabric should I use to make this pattern? And then also how to integrate all of those within a framework that was going to be sustainable and ethical. And so it came to me kind of as a vision. And the reason that I was not on board to do it completely on my own was because I was already pretty capped out. Like I had a full-time job. I was the CEO and like head of this one company. I was like, I don't have the bandwidth to do this on my own. But what I did have was a really old best friend that I've been friends with since I was 15, who I had bought, back 25 years ago. The Montreal real estate market was dirt cheap, and we managed to buy this building for nothing and had ran this building together and have stayed friends. And she had started her own business, and I don't want to kind of step on her toes, but when I just thought of who I would want to do this with, it was Tereska and nobody else. And if Tereska wasn't interested in doing it with me, I didn't want to do it. And thankfully she said yes. So I don't know if Tereska wants to speak to what that phone call felt like, or...
Yeah, I totally want to ask her that. That's so amazing. And I want to ask you one tiny question, Heather. Does launching a sustainable element to your company, but also having values in both companies that are about sustainability and repair, and Tereska, you talked about sort of repair culture, does it relieve any of the climate change anxiety for you?
No.
Okay. I was wondering if you might
because
have a secret for us.
I mean, it doesn't, because I don't have control over what the rest of the world is doing. So I think it doesn't relieve my anxiety, but what it does do is give me a sense of purpose. So I still feel profoundly anxious about the future, although I'm very hopeful, because I feel like the younger generations are really, we just need all the old guys to die and the new ones to come in, because they were born with this anxiety and care about it as much, if not more, than I do.
That'll be the name of this podcast, by the way.
What's that?
That'll be the name of the podcast episode.
Or just like let them all die. No, maybe like let them all retire. Let them all. I'm not that dark, but like let everybody retire or learn or get out of the way.
Unlikely.
But I think it does give me a profound sense of purpose and agency and pride. And so even though I have anxiety, I don't feel there's like a place to channel it that I think is really positive, and I think has a really positive impact and legacy, hopefully. And so that makes it a little bit easier to live with, because it's not just like undirected anxiety that doesn't have anywhere to go.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think this purpose-driven kind of work, and both that, especially that it can be both, you can have a profit goal and you can be incredibly ambitious in a private sector business, and also be driven by social and environmental impacts and good, is beautiful. And it's a narrative we need to tell a lot more of, because I think a lot of the time people separate those two things. It's, well, if you have values that are around sustainability, environmental and social sustainability, then it's likely going to negatively impact your profit and the bottom line. And I just think you guys are doing such a great job of kind of showing that that's not the case.
If I could just one little follow-up thing before we get to you, Tereska, is I think, like, people talk to me all the time about, or, traditional startup culture, people will be like, oh, like, are you interested in any investment? Like, do you want to scale up? Would you ever take your company public? And the answer is like, no, and no. I think if you are purpose-driven and you are mission-driven, you're much like, I'm not thinking about this like, ooh, there's a potential IPO in the future and I'm going to be able to cash out and make all of this money. Like, if that's your reason for getting into business, I think, I don't know. For me, that feels a little spiritually and emotionally kind of empty. And I don't know. I think, if that's the way that you think about your business and you are in a CEO position, like it's giving me Succession vibes, like you can have all the money in the world and you're still going to be empty and miserable and depressed.
Mm.
And I think if you're interested in living like a well-rounded and full and rich life, there needs to be more than money.
Mhm.
And I think if you approach your business with like making ethical and moral decisions at the foundation way before like profit doesn't, if we can't make it ethical, like profit doesn't even come into it.
Mhm.
I think it's been a really interesting framework for Tereska and I in particular when we started this new business to be making decisions, because there's just so like, it'll be like a yes or no answer. And if it doesn't meet our ethical framework, we don't even move forward. And so if anything, it's been really clarifying.
Mhm.
And like, just, I think in a lot of almost anything that involves creativity, when you have limits, you're able to be more creative.
Yeah.
And I think when you create this limit of like, we won't do this because of A, B, and C, it forces you to be more creative and find other solutions. And it benefits the entire planet because you're not making decisions for your bottom line and for your own personal needs. You are actually thinking about the collective.
Yeah.
And you're able to bring more value to your customer because you have done the work ahead of time.
Yeah. And there's customers who are looking for that.
More and more.
Especially the younger generations, I think. Awesome. Tereska. So 3-time entrepreneur you are. I am super curious. And I know that you went into business with your husband. I think just before this, your business was with your husband. What I'm curious about is how did you decide to say yes to Heather's proposal? What did that feel like for you? Were there trepidations, and what kind of eased those, or what allowed you to kind of jump off that cliff and take that kind of leap of faith?
Well, I think, first of all, I am a very impulsive person and I have almost zero anxiety. So it's fairly like making decisions and then following through on them, or like seeing an opportunity and grabbing it is a little bit like my zone of excellence. It's just something that comes very naturally to me. That said, when I started Urban Seedling with my husband back in 2010, that was what that looked like. He was just like, let's start a gardening company. And I was like, that's a great idea. And that was the entire thought process. And then we just like learned as we went. We didn't know anything about gardening or about running a business. So it was like a very, very steep learning curve. And we also had 3 kids in there. And that I left that business in a massive burnout. And so I never wanted to start a business again. And I was working as a program manager for tech startups or tech startup accelerators rather. And I really enjoyed being an employee, and it was wonderful. And after about a year and a half, I started to get a little bit antsy, and I was kind of looking for something else. And then Heather, I was literally on a walk at night. It was like 10 p.m. and Heather called me, and she just proposed just like that. She just said that she wanted to start a fabric store and that she wasn't going to do it unless I ran it with her. And I was kind of floored because it was not at all something. Starting another business was just like not at all something that I ever considered doing. However, like Heather said, we have a long history together. We've already kind of been in business together. We were when we were landlords. We've already, and she's already like a proven entity. She has like tons of success with her current business model, with Closet Core Patterns, um, and it just felt really exciting. It made me a little bit scared, which I always feel like is a really good sign. And um, I think deep down, it resonated with the part of me that did want to start another business, but I wasn't letting kind of impulse.
Yeah, because you have that in your core, because you've tried multiple times and you've done different things, and they've been, well, from the outside they look successful. I know from the inside they weren't, but really, you like you said, you were able to take those steps. So I can imagine there was still something that you wanted, but you were a little jaded, and looking for something a bit different. I know that you guys did some really intentional planning around this business when you started Core Fabrics. I'm kind of interested in, Tereska, how that felt different from other sort of businesses you've started, and whether you think that's something every business should invest in right off the bat, and if that's even a practical piece of advice.
So I think one thing that both Heather and I were really passionate about when we were starting Core Fabrics as serial entrepreneurs is that we didn't want to make all the same mistakes that we made the first time around. And that we did want to be really, really intentional. And we, from experience, understood deeply and profoundly how important it is to fully understand what problem you're solving, and then really get clear on a solid mission and a solid vision, and what the core values of your business are. And had someone told me when I was starting my first business that those things were important, I probably would have been like, yeah, or spent half an hour figuring something out and moving on. I don't know. I do think it would be really important for all people to do right away. I don't know if it's something that you can be told though. So anyway, but we spent a good 6 months, if not 8 months, working with a couple of different business coaches with EDI, so diversity consultant, and just really fleshing out a business plan, which was an internal document. We weren't required to write one for any kind of outside funding or anything, and that allowed us to really have a very, very clear framework about what kind of fabrics we wanted to sell, what our positioning was, who our customer was, and definitely who we were as a company. And I think what that allows us to do is cut through the noise, and people who resonate with our business can find us because we're really clear on what we do, but especially what we don't do. Because it's very tempting when you're starting your first business, or not first, but when you have a new business, whether it's your first or not, it's very tempting to just say yes to everything and be like, I could do that, and I could do that, and I could do that. And, my first business ended up with 4 different departments. It's basically 4 businesses in one. And it's still working and it's doing great. My husband's doing a fantastic job running it to this day. But that's not what I wanted to recreate. I wanted to do something really specific and see how far we could push that and how excellent we could get at our specialty.
And I will say, Tereska, if I could this is like one of her superpowers, because I am, to my benefit and detriment, an idea generating machine. And I like wake up and I have ideas, and I go to bed and I have ideas, and in my sleep I have an idea, and it's constant ideas. And I think all of them are great. And I'm like, we should do this. And then Tereska's like, let me just put the brakes on that for a minute and explain like why, like, we can't bring this line of fabric in because it doesn't meet our parameters, or we can't do this because this is not the focus of our business. And so she's the brakes, but she's a positive brake. And she's able to, because she is so clear, and she's kind of, I almost feel like the kind of like living embodiment of the values of this business, that when I come to her with all of this, she's able to really be like, that works, this doesn't work. And I am able to be like, okay. And I also understand like our roles in that sense. And so if I really passionately feel for something, like I'll fight for it. But because we spent so much time getting clear, and because she's so clear on what those things are, it makes it really, a lot of decisions become really easy to make because of that clarity.
I can give a really concrete example of that.
Yeah, please.
Which is, Heather came to me one morning and was like, linen bed sheets. We have to start selling linen bed sheets. Our linen is so beautiful, they would fly off the shelves. And while our linen is very beautiful, we love linen. And I'm sure we could sell a lot of bed sheets. That's not our business. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why veering off in that direction is actually damaging to the core business.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's such a
I was convinced. I was like, this is it. oh, we're going to become a new bed linen. We're going to have a whole bedding division of this business. And it's like, the reality is, okay, great. Well, then you have to find a factory that's going to ethically produce this, right? Like, then you have to deal with shipping and storage and all of this stuff. And like, it's a completely different business model. But for a moment, I was convinced it was the decision. And I think part of it too is like when you're trying to grow, and when maybe we had the first few years, we really struggled financially. And I think when you're trying to find a solution for that, that it can be really easy to be like, the solution to this is I start this new thing and not I just get better at the thing that I committed to doing in the beginning, and being patient with how long that might take to yield. And I'm glad we were really patient and focused, because I think we're finally cresting that period of financial difficulty. And it's because Tereska didn't let me fly into 5 different directions and like it like split our resources and our energy.
Yeah.
I feel so seen and heard.
Yeah, it sounds like a beautiful, like synergistic relationship. I think it's so fun that you're talking about this, because we hear a lot about pivot to adapt to the needs of the client and the customer and the opportunities, right? And I talk about that a lot at Venture for Canada. I'm probably more towards your side of it, Heather, where it's too many ideas and I have to calm myself down, or have other people calm me down. I think it's so interesting, because there's that flip side of also sometimes you need to stick to it, and you just need to stick to it for a little bit longer and see what happens. So I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you guys about business, friendship and business. So the kind of question in my mind is, if shit hits the fan, do you prioritize the business or the friendship? And I feel what you have done to mitigate that question is pretty cool and unique. And I wondered if you maybe could talk about what you guys did to kind of help streamline.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like we've never had to prioritize one over the other. I mean, maybe Tereska feels a different way, but I don't feel like, or maybe that's not true. We certainly got into like a couple of little fights over the last few years that are not, it's not like we're not talking to each other or whatever. But I think the benefit of being we have very different, I think, first of all, it's really important to understand that we have really different strengths. Tereska is an operational genius and I am more on the creative side. And so there's very little overlap between the things that we do well. And so we're not stepping on each other's toes or being like, well, that's the thing that I'm good at. Like, I don't have that ego struggle at all with Tereska. So I think that's a big part of it. But I think but having said that, we have similar personalities, and that we're both very direct, I think very emotionally intelligent. And we've also been friends for a really long time and know each other really well. And so I think the combination, we have this kind of little magic cocktail, which I think has made it really easy for us to be close, to stay friends, and also to have to make these hard decisions and know that like, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow, like not want to be in business together. And I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and like not want to spend time with Tereska anymore. Like I'm not worried about that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, T.
I sure do. I think that there's some like really key elements to being in business with a friend. Like I think it can be a really big positive thing to be in business with friends or family, because you know the person very well. They're a known quantity. You can know whether or not they're reliable. You can know whether they're good with money, or you know what their strengths and weaknesses are. And I think the trope of never getting into business with friends comes from not being direct and having ego get in the way. And when you take those elements out, when you have a relationship that's built on trust, and the trust that the other person isn't going to get offended by what you say. Like I know I can say pretty much anything, and Heather, it's going to roll off Heather's back, and I feel like that is a two-way thing. Like she can snap at me, she doesn't have to like edit what she's saying, and I can just like hear what she means rather than get like my feathers in a rumple because of maybe like a tone in the moment, or it's not something I wanted to hear. And then I think that the fact that we have, like Heather said, complementary skill sets is like really, really key. So getting into business with someone who's your friend just because they're your friend, but you're good at the same thing, and then there's this big hole where nobody's good at it, is where I think it can get really dicey. And I wouldn't want, like, I think in that case, I guess what I'm really trying to say is it's important as a business owner and a boss to have a really clear vision of what's professional and what's personal. And this goes for your co-founder relationship, but it also goes with all of your relationships with your employees. And it's a practice. It's something that you have to remember every single day, and always bring it up. So, like when we're getting into a really heated discussion about the business, it has nothing to do with our friendship. It's professional, and it stays at work. And in that same way, you can have employees that are friends as well, or you can become friends with your employees. But professional is professional, personal is personal. So then that way, when you have that clear division, you can go in and talk about things that are a little more delicate, or can, you don't have to worry about having to choose. You should never have to choose business over friendship, because those things are separate.
Wow. How do you do that? Like, how do you set up, or how do you coach almost your staff in that too? Like, how do you set that tone? And you said it's a sort of, I love that two things. You said you have to trust that you can be honest with people and that they're going to take you at they're going to understand what you mean as opposed to necessarily what you say. And I love that definition of trust. And also this idea of kind of it being a practice every day. We have this a lot coming up at work. I think probably it always has. I think with the Gen Z, especially, I'm noticing it, but that might be just because I work with a lot of Gen Z. Um, there's this a discomfort a little bit with it. And then if you get promoted above a friend, like what happens if you're suddenly working, the boss of a friend? I'd love to hear you just dig in more on that, Heather. Yeah, maybe.
Oh, I'm raising my hand because I have a lot to say about this. I think that I cannot, and I think this is specific, like, I don't want to say specifically, but I think it's particularly an issue with women, is this fear of conflict. And I hear it all the time. And I hear it with my staff, right? They'll be having a problem with another staff member, and they'll talk to me about it. And they're like, but I'm so scared of conflict. Like, I can't deal with this because I'm so scared of conflict. And I'm always like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, going and saying, hey, that you said this thing and it really hurt my feelings. What is going to happen? Like, what is it that on the end of that, you think they're going to punch you in the face? Like, where does this fear of conflict come from? And I see it in all of my female friendships, all over the world. I just see people being so scared of conflict, and I am not scared of conflict. Like, I think the thing is, you can't go into it being like, I'm going into this because I want to start a fight and I want to have an antagonistic conversation. It's like, I see a problem and I want to address it face on and have a conversation about it and resolve it. And I think people need to think about that feeling of discomfort. It's less about conflict and it's more about resolution. And if if you're going in being like, I'm right and I'm going to get my way and I want you to understand why I'm right and why you're wrong, well, of course, that is actually going to result in a conflict. But if you're going into these periods or these feelings or these situations of discomfort and you're like trying to find a solution and you're like, okay, I'm going to approach with clarity how I'm feeling, what I see maybe the problem is, my own role that I'm playing within this, and then creating space for them to do the same. That is like the magic place where things get resolved and people feel heard. And I think I've worked really hard trying to do that, especially within my team. I have like 8 women that are all very afraid of conflict to some degree or another. And I am like trying to foster this place where we are like, I see headaches or pain points or whatever, and I'm like bringing them up, I'm calling it out, I'm seeing conflicts between people that I'm trying to help mediate, and I'm also like empowering them to do that with each other, right? Like, I don't want to be the mom that they're coming to be like, blah, 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 said what? It's like, no, you're a grown person, you see this as a problem, like, how can I help support you to go and kind of take care of this yourself so that you're solving this problem at work, but also you're solving this problem at home and you're solving these problems with your friendship. And I think as a generation and as like a gender and maybe as a species, if we could learn how to approach these periods of discomfort with that sense of openness and like resolution, I think we would just be obviously, if we want to look at world events, in a much different place than coming in with like, I know what the answer is. I am so firm in how I feel. And it's a black and white answer. It's like, of course, well, this is how like wars happen, right? So there has to be this.
I would say I would bring the exact same point. I agree with everything Heather said, but on the opposite side, I think a lot of people make decisions out of trying to avoid difficult conversations. So I think anytime you just kind of have to feel it in yourself. You're like, oh, I am avoiding that person or I'm avoiding that subject. Then that means you have to address that subject and that issue and that person. And especially, and something I just wanted to correct, Gina, that you said earlier was that you trust that people are going to receive what you say, like what you mean to say instead of how you say it. It's the opposite. You can't ever expect somebody else to receive what you say in any other way than they're gonna. You have no control over how somebody else is gonna react to what you're doing. It's what you have to do. Like when Heather's talking to me, I have to I have to take what she's saying in that light. I'm doing the work to not get offended if there's something heated.
And it's part of our it's part of our values. Like we have when people are onboarded in our company, we have our like team values, and one of them is assume good intent. So
Yes.
when somebody is speaking to you, you have, like, as a default, you have to assume that that person means their best. If you go into any conversation or conflict or whatever with anybody, assuming that they're out to get you or they're out to screw you or whatever, then that is going to poison the entire interaction. If you just
100%.
assume
Yeah.
that people mean the best, even if they don't, just go into it with that assumption, I think it completely transforms the interaction.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to correct is that you said something about coaching employees to have that attitude. And that also is, I just think, a waste of time and not possible because human nature. And again, you have, as a boss, you have no control over how your employees are thinking and feeling. That belongs to them. And you shouldn't have control over that because that would be like a dictatorship. But what you can and have to do is set the tone. So I only have control over how and when I talk to people. And so no matter what the reaction of the employee is, I, as a boss, am maintaining my cool, calm composure. And I am constantly remembering that this is professional and it's not personal. And no matter, even if my employee is very upset, or if the subject is very delicate or is being taken the wrong way, it is my job as the boss to remain professional at all times and to always just get to the meat of what is important here and not let things digress into, well, you said this and or I didn't like the way you did that. Like, that's my role, is to just like, yeah, stay calm, cool, and collected, and set the tone and set the example. And then it's up to the employee to kind of like, I guess, as an employer, as a boss, you're setting the tone and the culture of your company. And if the culture of the company is that personal stays personal and professional stays professional, and you're living that every day as the employer, then eventually that is going to trickle down to your employees, and the people who resonate with that are going to stay, and the people who can't handle it are not going to.
Yeah, that's right. That's real. So that's the practice, is the self-talk of if you're able to maintain that separation between the two, then you're going to be sort of, demonstrating how to do that. And that's really all that is within your circle of influence. There's not control. Thank you for that clarification, Tereska. I appreciate it. And I agree with you. And Heather, this idea of, okay, you may hate conflict, but do you love resolution? Just that slight tweak is so cool. And let's imagine a positive out. I did this exercise one time in some leadership training around conflict. And they told us that the big reason we all hate conflict is because our brains imagine the worst case scenario. So the person's going to be mad at us. They're going to be aggressive. And usually we're imagining some very early relationships with anger. And so the exercise, the discipline, was to imagine the conflict, the raising the issue, and it going super well, just as an exercise. You imagine the person's going to be grateful. They're going to be super open. It's going to build the friendship and make it stronger, or the working relationship and make it stronger.
I have to say that Heather is really, really good at coming into difficult conversations very, very well prepared. Like, she really gives a lot of thought and will have talking points. And I think that level of preparation is magical to having like a good interaction and a positive outcome.
My tip for that, because I have had to have very hard conversations with people, is if anybody's looking for advice in this, I practice out loud over and over and over again. Like in driving around in my car, I'm practicing what I'm going to say over and over again. And especially if it's like, if I'm like pissed at one of my employees or something, it's almost like when you're really angry, you're supposed to like write the email, but not send it. Like all in my car driving, be like, and then you did this and it drove me crazy. And I like get it out. Right. And then I just keep doing it over and over until I like find, oh, this is the pitch. Like this is, oh, like this is how I should phrase this. And like, by the time I walk into that conversation, I'm generally really well prepared. I have my talking points. I've thought about how they're going to like feel and receive it. And it generally goes pretty well. And I think that preparation
of the emotion, it sounds like
you have to like work through it, however you have to work through it.
it
Like
doesn't accidentally come out when you're there.
And it might a little bit, but you don't want the bulk of it to come out in that conversation. And I think a lot of people get heated and hot and then they want to go and like deal with it right away. And I think a lot of times too, it's just like, you need to like, actually, not dealing with this today. I'm going to take a day. I'm going to take a couple days. We're going to make a meeting to talk about this in 2 days. I'm actually do need that time to process and figure out how I'm going to approach this.
Yeah, that's a lot of discipline and such intentionality. It's really inspiring, both of you. Speaking of personal and professional, I did want to touch on something that I found super fascinating about the way you guys work. So we hear a lot about work-life balance, and another term that we like to use is kind of work-life integration, because balance suggests that maybe there's a 50-50 of work and life. And at Venture for Canada, we're trying to figure out sort of what our work culture is, working with staff all the way across the country in different time zones. Everybody's virtual. There's times of extreme busyness. There's sometimes when there's less. I don't know exactly when that is, but theoretically, there's sometimes when there's less busyness. And we're testing out this idea of kind of extreme flexibility. So where, as long as you're getting your work done, as long as you're accountable to the teammates that you need to be accountable to in the moment, you are allowed, your time is your own. And what that means is that if I'm flying on Sunday and I want to do work in the plane on Sunday, and I want to take Wednesday morning off to get a massage, drive kids somewhere, whatever it is, that I can do that, and no one's going to bother me about it. It's completely fine. We're allowed to be completely transparent about it. And the point is that different people work in different ways. Work means different things to different people. It feels different to different people, and it feels different at different points in our lives. And so I wanted to ask you about how I think you both have very different ways of talking about what work-life balance means to you, and specifically I'm thinking specifically about the goal not being work-life balance, the goal being your mental, physical well-being. And what does that look like for both of you? And maybe we'll start with Heather.
I mean, it's interesting. I think our work, I think my team, particularly on the Closet Core Pattern side, because I'm more directly, I manage that team, and Tereska is really more responsible for managing the Core Fabrics team. But I think on the Closet Core team, we basically do have this extreme flexibility. I don't know if I would define it as such. I don't know if I've even ever articulated that to my team. But you come in when you come in, you leave when you come out. Like, you leave, like we have 2 days a week when people need to be in the office, but even that's flexible. Like if, we have a slow day and they're like, I'd really could use a focus day at home, that's fine. And I don't have any control over what people are doing when they're not in the office, right? So unless they're missing a meeting, if they want to start work at 7 and finish at 3 or whatever, they can do that. I don't I have enough going on that I'm not going to be worried about whether or not they're like clocking in at 9 and leaving at 5. And I think I've always, because most of my team has children at home, I have to be flexible. Like, what am I going to do? Well, your kid's sick with the stomach flu, like come into work anyways. Like it's not how it works. But I think one of the things that saves us, I think if we were an environment, like I think I've tried to build a really fun and creative and inspiring place to work. And I think everybody who works for me really cares about what we do and really loves and believes in our mission and believes in what we're doing. They want to come into work. They like what they're doing. They see the role that they play within the company as integral, and they understand how their work impacts the work of other people. And so it's rare that I feel people really slack off in that way because we have created this culture of everybody caring. I think it would be maybe more of an issue where we didn't have that sense of purpose and you are working from home 3 days a week and you're just like putting a widget in a box and there's no sense of connection to a greater purpose. I think I would probably have to, I don't know if police is the right word, but like be more aware of how people are spending their time. But I will say the other thing that's really been key to us, particularly as our team has grown and as the complexity of the work that we've done has increased and changed over the last few years, is really being connected through Slack. And we use Notion as a project management tool. And so we're using Notion to connect, my pattern making department has a requisition for sample fabric that they need from the fabric store. And all of this stuff is connected. And this has kind of been our mission this year, is to try to get all of this stuff connected. So when my project manager is assigning tasks, if those tasks are not we have like an actual metric for actually seeing like, this person is not checking they're not getting their work done. Like we actually have a system to kind of monitor that to some degree. So I think that's been really, really key. And then having a really good communication channel for everybody to communicate. So like, we don't need to be in the office because we just all are on our Slack chit-chatting all day long. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting and really relatable. And I think, Tereska, from your perspective, I'd love you to answer or kind of reflect on how you two individually differ, and especially as co-founders of Core Fabrics, and whether there's ever tension there, or whether and how you respect each other's completely different ways of looking at work. At least from what I understood from when we were talking earlier.
We talk a lot more on our side.
They're very noisy. We're the quiet side. They're the loud side.
There's definitely a lot more chit chat happening on the Closet Core side.
So, but I have things to say about this, which is one of the biggest personal benefits that I've seen from getting into business with Heather is that she is really, really good at taking care of herself, and then also building this amazing culture, like a really human and humane workplace where what is most important is that everybody has a really good quality of life, and then everything else is secondary. And it was something that was really missing in me. Like I had this kind of like grind porn mentality of like, my value is less if I'm not working really, really hard and struggling. So the idea that you can get really good work done and that you can bring value and have a balanced and life where you are in a good place physically and mentally was like, I mean, it sounds really obvious to say out loud, but just like Heather is a really big role model and mentor for me in that way. And when she's like, she'll just get into a zone and work like crazy when things are really busy, and just like have this amazing output. And then afterwards, she'll say, "Hey guys, I need rest, and then I'm taking next week off." And there doesn't need to be justification. There doesn't need explanation. You don't need a doctor's note. It's like, I need this time. And so I was just like, hey, I can do that too. And I can take the time that I need. And I think the big difference is that I have 3 kids at home. And so what that looks like is kind of different, where I can't go into a hole and just work for a week, and then take a week off. It's more that I have given myself permission to clock out and leave work and leave it behind fully, like just like close the laptop and go home and then focus on myself and my family. And like we have like a 35-hour kind of maximum work week. That's full time for us. And we also encourage our employees to also have that same mindset. And so on my team, it's like they can't really work from home because a lot of them, like more than half, are fulfillment. So they have to be here cutting fabric and packing boxes. However, I do not dictate what time they come in. I do not dictate what time they leave. I just want to see their output. I want to know that the packages are leaving and that the orders aren't sitting for too long. And they are a lot more. They hold themselves a lot more accountable than I ever could. Like they really. I don't know if we've just been really lucky to hire like really amazing people, or if it has to do with the culture that we've built here. But we give them a lot of agency, and they have full responsibility over their sphere of influence. And I do as close to zero micromanaging as possible. And I consider them experts in their domain. So I may go and ask questions and learn from them, like, why are we shipping using this particular service? And then, but I in no way am dictating what they're doing in terms of particular tasks day to day. And we will kind of quarterly come together as a team, and do like a workshop together and talk about where people's jobs are overlapping, and where the ball is being passed from one to the other and what can be improved in terms of workflow. And we have kind of like this really collaborative way of kind of improving our efficiency, where it's not this top down, I on the corner of my desk have made up some kind of scenario that you have to then respect, and then I have to please. Not interested.
That's an incredibly important point. I don't think this is luck. This is very intentional. Like when you give people full circle accountability for something, you treat them like an adult. They are adulting in their work, and they are going to, because they are going to feel the consequence because it's full circle. They can't pass that buck. And so I think that it's a very intentional management style. And I think it's one of the most effective. And so I think anyone who is treated like much more micromanaged, and that ownership and power is taken away from them, or they're only a cog in a wheel, I think anyone then defaults to external blame and external responsibility, externalizing responsibility, et cetera. And so I think it's sort of the secret to management is if you can figure out a business cycle or work cycles, tasks and activities that have that, and can be contained within one person. I think it's amazing.
I have one thing to add too, which is like, I am a grinder, and I will, like Tereska said, like I will just burn the midnight oil. I'll do a 60 or 70 hour week if we have a big project and I have a deadline. I do not and will never expect that level of work from my team ever. I don't want people working more than 35 hours a week. I don't. Like, hey, every once in a while you have to stay late on a Wednesday because you're trying to get something out. If that has to happen from time to time, that's fine. But I want people to leave here at 5 o'clock and go and live their lives. And I don't want people getting burned out. Like, I love my team. I have a few people experiencing different degrees of like neurodivergence. And I don't want to put them in a position where they're like sacrificing their mental health, where they are like in an environment where they're like triggering things or making things worse. Where they don't feel safe to come and talk to me and say, hey, like I'm feeling tired, or this has come up for me. And like, I get kind of emotional about it because I like to joke that I've been fired or laid off from almost every job I've ever had, except for my interior design job. And it's because I worked for tyrants, and it was like primarily in the service industry, working for like deeply misogynistic men who had completely ridiculous expectations from their workforce, and who all they cared about was money. They didn't care about their team. And I just worked in like, it feels like dozens of environments like that. And I think that just such ingrained so deeply in me when I started hiring people, and what kind of boss I wanted to be and how I wanted people to feel was just like not that. And it's evolved, and it is evolving. But right now, for example, we haven't really talked about it, but like we've acquired a new company on the closet core side. Last year, we started a new monthly subscription pattern service. So not only are we doing standalone sewing patterns every year, but now we have a new one every month with it's a private community. So there's like content we're creating, there's YouTube, there's tutorials, there's all this stuff. Then we acquired a new brand, and it's like my staff didn't really change, right? Like I have the same group of people and we're doing all this other stuff. And so I was like, optimistic, like we can do it, guys. We just need to get more efficient. Like we need to systemize, like we just, and then it just kind of became clear. And they weren't even saying this to me. They weren't like, this is too much. I could just see it. Like, my sample maker would come in and be like, I like cried this morning. And I'm like, what's going on? She's like, I'm just really stressed because I have so many coats to make. And I'm like, okay, well, you shouldn't be crying about that. Like, and then somebody else is like, okay, well, I'm just really getting behind on this one pattern. I'm like, okay, I can able to like look at that globally and say, like, we're understaffed. This isn't that you guys aren't working hard enough, that you're bad at this. It's, we don't have enough people right now. And so right now I'm like, we're going to have to hire somebody, and I have to find the money to do that. I'm not going to get them working 40, 50 hours a week because of that. Like if I want to implement a change like this, it's up to me to find the money to pay for the staff to support it. It's not for the staff's job to like meet every one of my whims with like more work hours, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I want to second that. Is that whenever it's the same on the core fabric side, is that whenever somebody has to work more than 35 hours a week to meet whatever kind of workflow or procedures that we have in place, it means that we're doing it wrong. And that to me, rather than being like, oh, what is that employee doing wrong? It's more like, how can we change the system, or do we need to add staff, or do we like what piece do we need to remove from what you have to do in a day to make it like doable in the amount of time that you're supposed to be working?
Yeah, systems thinking that's a huge part of leadership, I think. We have to wrap up now because I basically just want to continue talking for another hour. We have more things we want to talk about. So maybe it should have you guys back and we should do a second episode is what I think. We didn't get to talk about a couple of things we wanted to, but before we go, I want to ask, where should people find you? We will link to all of your socials, et cetera, in the show notes, but just verbally, where should people find you if they want to follow or purchase your services?
Well, closetcorepatterns.com is where you can find all of our sewing patterns, our sewing classes, our 3 pattern lines. Corefabricstore.com is where you can find the fabric store. And then we are on Pinterest, on Instagram, and on YouTube as at Core Fabrics and at Closet Core Patterns.
And your digital presence is gorgeous. And just to circle back to the very beginning, when you said you launched your blog, when blogs were big, you have also kind of done an incredible job of optimizing video and using that to your benefit. I mean, your stuff is amazing and really engaging, really professional. And the followers that you have, the huge amounts of followers show that. I just want to thank you so much for being here. The words of wisdom from both of you are going to be incredibly valuable to anyone who's listening to this, whether they are thinking about starting a business, whether they're a manager in a company. I think we've talked about so many different elements of business. So thank you for your generosity and your professionalism and your creative thinking. And your relationship is just so cool. Thanks for sharing like the ins and outs of that, because I think that's a fascinating aspect and kind of a mysterious aspect, a little bit of business.
Well,
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, my pleasure. Take care, both of you. And I hope we can chat again soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.